You know, we're very fortunate today to have two representatives from the federal government that have actually implemented cloud services to talk to us about lessons learned and actually how they implemented cloud services at the federal level. So we've got David McClure, who was appointed as the Associate Administrator in Citizens Services and Innovative Technologies for the U.S. General Services Administration, and Bajinder Paul, who was appointed the Deputy Associate Administrator. Basically, they deliver cloud services for the General Services Administration for the federal government. So if we could have a hand, I'd like to introduce Bajinder and David.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, there we go. So thanks for having us. We really want to thank the California Technology Agency, Carlos, and all of the corporate sponsors for inviting Bajinder and I out to have a discussion with you this afternoon over lunch about where we are with cloud computing in the federal government. We've been down this path now for almost 4 years, and we've got some experience and some lessons learned that we actually are happy to share. And we're here to learn as well, because we're all in this together. We are going down some uncharted territory in cloud computing. And if anyone tells you they have all the answers, believe me, from two guys that deal with it every day, there is a lot to learn as you go down this path. So thanks for having us. We're going to walk through some of what we are doing and why, share with you some examples of what we've been doing at the federal level. And we also recognize the federal government is not the only government in the United States, that there is state government, plays an important role, and is ripe for cloud services as well. Let me start talking about cloud computing first by not even talking about technology, because I think that's the wrong conversation to have at the beginning. It's like any conversation you have around technology in general with your business partners that you're serving, if you're on the IT side, on the mission side of your agency. Why would I want to do anything in computing in general, much less cloud? What's it going to get me? And CIOs are always asked this question. So let's step back a moment and think about the context of sort of where things are. And in the Obama administration, we've been asking these questions in the first term, and we'll continue to ask them in the second term. We are ingrained in government with a management approach that's created stovepiped information, created silos and management hierarchies. This is just the natural flavor of government in terms of its delivery model. And our data is literally everywhere. We have a lot of data in the government, but we often don't know where it is. And when we can find it, we're not even sure how much we want to rely on the accuracy of it. So that's the reality. What we want to move to, and what we're trying to push at the federal level, is a different view of the role and context that information plays in the delivery of government services. A much more analytical, open, reuse type of approach to data that creates value for the agency and allows you to manage yourself and deliver services to your customers in smart and intelligent ways. That's really what we're trying to do. So before, again, we get to technology, let's think about where we are and what the challenges we face from operational, managerial, service delivery perspectives. And once again, we'll frame a technology around this and see a way in which it can really help us go forward. At the same time that we're having these challenges with how we've organized our processes in government, and how we've actually put information and data in the silos, we are also creating an enormous amount of it. It's the tsunami of data. We are inundated with information in our personal lives, in our corporate lives, in our public sector lives as well. It's growing at phenomenal rates, as many of these bits of information, bytes that you see from companies that specialize in monitoring it, that data is becoming an overwhelming perspective. And it is the data that's really creating challenges for us, and what we do with it and what we know about it are really what we want to focus on going forward. I met with Ray Ozzie, the chief architect, software architect for Microsoft a couple of years ago when we first started cloud computing, and he said something that I thought is just spot on. Data is the flint for the next 25 years. We are moving away from this preoccupation with buying stuff, gadgets, technology, and we're starting to see again a rejuvenation in the golden ore that technology uses to deliver something called data. And you'll see, I think, in literature, and certainly we're seeing it at the federal level, we're pushing this now, we are talking more and more about information management once again. Because it's really what we're struggling with. Information management. The volume is increasing at enormous rates. It's creating challenges for what we do with it, how we use it, and the value proposition for collecting it in the first place. That data challenge is not new in certainly any level of government. We are consumed with collecting lots of information in for all sorts of purposes that are related to the management as well as delivery of services, from defense to agriculture to transportation to law enforcement to tracking fraud, waste, and abuse, to looking at how we actually use grant information for new scientific discoveries, for how we manage our budgets. We are constantly collecting, acquiring, and trying to analyze information, and we've been doing this now for a long time. But again, the previous slides are trying to remind us that we're not really pushing the level down. We're actually creating more of this. And the enormity of it is actually taking place in the unstructured data, not the stuff that we have in our official databases, but all of the surrounding information, contextual information that we're creating that we're not describing, we're not tagging, and we really don't even know what we're doing with it. So that in of itself is the challenge. So what is different today? Today, in this moment in time, you know, you've probably heard this phrase before. It's volume, velocity, and variety. That's what's really happening. The volume of data is increasing, the velocity by which we create it is increasing, and the variety, text, data, video, all of it's now being consumed and created at enormous rates. What's also different is the technology that we now have been introduced to, some of it's still in nascent stages, that allows us to mine this data with incredible speed and accuracy. Some of the in-memory analytics, some of the in-memory databases, content analytics, search-based discovery tools, one of which we've built in our own office using cloud technology and Hadoop. Some of this really allows you to start slicing through what you have in front of you. But at the same time, we want to cut through this information not only faster, we want to do it more intelligently. We want to be proactive in how we're managing our programs, our results, our outcomes. We want to look at predictions based upon what happens if we do this or that to a program. We want to be able to detect fraud, waste, and abuse before it actually occurs. Or when it occurs, we want to stop it within nanoseconds, minutes, not years. So the speed of what we want to do with the analytics of information is also changing. And voila, there you have it. That's where the intersection comes between the dynamic, unbelievable application space that we're creating and cloud computing. Cloud computing gives us a low-cost, commodity-based approach to processing information that we simply did not have 5 and 10 years ago. So it's almost like a perfect storm. Lots of data, rich playground to play in, really advancements in applications that allow us to cut through databases and collect and really analyze information in new ways, and enormous leaps in processing speed through virtualization. So that is the perfect storm that creates for us the incentive for moving into practical and usable cloud solutions. So in the federal government, we are focused on cloud computing because of three magic words. We think it provides a very inexpensive and often cost-effective way to manage your data assets. Second, it tends to allow you to do things faster because it creates more agility and more flexibility in how you can provision things in your computing environment. And third, it's a heck of a lot greener. If you look at power use estimates, you can see that virtualized data centers and virtualized technologies are dramatically reducing the carbon footprint, which is significant in our data centers with cloud computing. So we're driving innovation. We're trying to understand how we can turn up services quickly, adjust it based upon supply and demand, some elasticity, and we're trying to get our technology to be as green and efficient as it possibly can. And we want to reuse. We've got to quit reinventing the wheel. We've got to reuse this across this environment in a way that really is cost effective. So these are the drivers that we created 3 years ago in the federal government to push the inspection, not a forced march. There is no forced march in the federal government to cloud computing. Bajinder will talk in a moment about cloud first as an incentive to get agencies to think about alternatives in cloud, but certainly you have to still work through the analytics of what makes sense to put in different kinds of cloud environments. Very, very attractive though. Cloud computing is very different. I wish we would stop using the word cloud computing. We need to start calling it candy or popsicle or something. Let's just stop calling it cloud.
Yeah, right.
It has created a myth and mystique. We throw it around as though it's a thing, as if it's one thing, and it's not. It's really a very, very a very unique set of ways in which we can go about doing some computing. What's really interesting about cloud computing, step back 5 years and call it shared services, step back further and call it distributed computing, whatever you want to do, it changes the provider-consumer relationship. One of the things that we're telling our CIOs in the federal government, you better start thinking about whether you want to be a provider of IT services or a consumer of IT services, because you're probably not really good at being a provider of everything, so decide what you'd like to consume and focus your attention on rather than trying to do it all. You've all seen the usual explanation of what cloud computing is. These are the 5 core tenets that NIST actually put together several years ago: service-based, scalable and elastic, shared, measured, and internet-based. The reality is that cloud computing may, in the government space, not have all of those characteristics perfectly in place. I used to describe cloud computing in its early days when people were throwing around public cloud computing. It's basically locationless computing. I don't really care where my data is. I don't care where it's processed. I don't care how it's actually what's done with it. I just want my data to be consumed and then given back to me in the value-added way that I prescribe. The processing, the operation side of it, I leave to someone else. So we all know that in the government setting, locationless computing is a nice concept, but as we've discovered in the federal space, we kind of like to determine where the boundaries are of where that data actually travels. And we actually would like to have a flashlight and follow it a couple of times to make absolutely sure it is contained or it is managed in those locations. We have a term that I've coined in the federal government through a lot of talks in cloud computing. It is not faith-based computing. I go to so many conferences and panels where people will say, well, the vendor says this, they say they do that, they say they do this, so what am I supposed to do? Just go write the check, sign the contract, and go get them? Of course not. If you're operating that way, and you may be operating that way now with your external hosted provider, you are really putting yourself in a tremendous risk situation. So in cloud computing, the governments create the standards they want, and what we have really decided in the federal space is that here are the things that we need included in cloud computing. It may lower the value case. It may not make it as cost effective as the literature or the marketing brochure would make you believe, but it's still powerful and it still provides cost efficiencies that we can't perhaps match in our own computing capacity. But there are requirements that we're going to wrap around it, and if the provider is unwilling to meet those requirements, we can say move on to someone else. So we're taking a hard line in terms of what the security, the privacy, the e-records, the FOIA, the records management provisions are, the reconstitution of data, all of these issues that everyone throws out. How do we know? We are actually setting the requirements, and we got the flashlight, and we want to follow to make sure that they are actually able to do it. So I'm from Missouri, show me. That's our mentality that we're taking. And it is long, it's longer and more arduous than people would think, but it is extremely important, as you know, to protect the data of government. Absolutely charged with good stewardship. Cloud computing is not a place, it's an operating model. I've already heard several times since landing here in Sacramento the term private computing, private clouds, public clouds. And there really are two spectrums here, with a lot in between. So the other takeaway I think that everyone should be feeling from this discussion that's occurring is there is no such thing as one type of cloud computing. There are many operating models to choose from. In fact, it is now going to be important for CIOs to work with their business partners in the mission side of government to determine if these different operating models work for their unique needs and making that kind of decision. There's also nothing, at least that I'm aware of in the federal government, that is truly public cloud, locationless public cloud computing. We at GSA brought in Google email a year and a half ago, and my phone rang every day. So you've just put Gmail into your agency? No, of course we didn't. We had an enormous contract. We had an enormous standards testing on the security side, and a very painful process with Google because it is its first time really putting it in place in a government setting. And all of those conditions had to be met. And there were some close times, and Bajinder knows this, close times where the service provider wasn't really sure they had signed up for that. So these are really tough things that you really go through. But the really important thing to take away from this is that it depends on more control versus lower value, less control and higher value. It's about culture, it's about control, it's about ownership. That's what you have to struggle with in the cloud computing world. The hybrids can create different kinds of scenarios for you. Internal clouds just to your agency, virtualized storage and servers out the kazoo, with enormous efficiencies in not only the operating capacity, but your new applications. But it is within the boundaries of your department, your agency. It can be something a little bit different from that. It involves a shared business model where you're actually multi-tenant in nature. It's certainly becoming popular as people revisit the shared services approach. It can be government delivery of certain shared services in a cloud environment across multiple agencies, all law enforcement, all health, all food inspection, all environment, all X creates a cloud for that functional business line in government. And they all work or share in that cloud environment with requirements that, again, they have all agreed to. And at the other ends of the spectrum are really pure public and semi-public types of clouds with different kinds of requirements for security, privacy, and so forth. So again, the takeaway here is lots of things to choose from, lots of different ways to approach it. What you have to ask yourself is, how do I want to deliver cloud services so that I gain the efficiencies of it, but I maintain a level of control, and I'm happy with that balance, whether it's public, private, or some hybrid. I can live with that balancing that's being done. So I think in the future we will actually, I think we're about done with the debate over what is cloud computing. And instead we're shifting to a dialogue about How do I choose to move in and out of cloud-oriented environments, public, private, or hybrid, that increase my capability to deliver value to my business partners in the lines of business in health, law enforcement, public safety, wherever you work? That's the key question you have to begin asking yourself. What economically and from a mission perspective makes sense that this model creates the incentive for someone to go to? We are not doing, in all cases, I think we've sort of had a simple dialogue of pick up, lift, and replace. I pick up what I have and I just go park it over in a cloud. That's not really, if you ask anybody that's done really good business planning and strategy around cloud computing, very little of it is lift and place. It's dissecting the components of what you have in your legacy and determining what to preserve and what makes sense to put in these different operating environments. So a lot of myth, a lot of facts. You can read them up there. These are just some common myths. Somebody said it this morning in one of the security panels, I think. My experience is that if you look at current security configurations in many public sector agencies, I'm not condemning or blessing anyone, it is often less secure than what you will find or can be delivered by a cloud provider. I've gone through the drill. Not in every case, not 100% of the time. I don't know what the percent is, but if you think that you are the top security firm in the government, then I think you need to do an acid test and compare yourself against what state of the art is and determine whether you're really at the same level and can do it with the same cost efficiencies. So even the security side of this, if defined right, implemented right, overseen right, and audited right, can provide you with capability that is really, really important to have. This is a conversation usually that's worth about 10 or 15 minutes, but you need to have a business case for everything that you're doing in the cloud. It's no different from any other technology decision. And there are a lot of good decisional models that have been put together by different public and private sector companies that walk you through the portfolio of what you have in the operational and application space and determine what makes sense to move to cloud, to move to pure shared services, or to keep in-house. And that's really the strategy we're going to be dealing with for many years, is that hybrid environment of in-house, shared outsourcing, and then maybe different kinds of cloud environments. This is about the movement of data, how we protect it, how we process it, and how we pull it in for valuable purposes ourselves. I also have a slide here that tries to demystify the fact that anybody is doing anything cost effectively or efficiently with cloud computing. If you go to www.apps.gov, you will find 75 case studies from the federal government, of many agencies listed here, where these benefits listed on the left side of the screen have actually been documented. Now notice they are not all cost savings. Some of this is about scalability, agility, ability to increase the productivity of the workforce, things like that. So there are huge benefits, not maybe as big as what the consumer thought they were going to be, but they are there. And so that in of itself is a reason not to just close your eyes to SaaS-based, infrastructure-based, or platform-based solutions that might be good for you. And this is what we've been doing in the federal government for 3 or 4 years. Try before we buy. Move very low-risk things in the cloud environments. Do web hosting, development testing, COOP, disaster recovery. Do some things that really make sense. Get your feet wet. Prove to yourself that you can actually do it. You can contract for it. You can set some SLAs that work. Don't just, again, it's not a lift and place. Get your feet wet, and that's what we've been doing in the federal government, and we've learned an enormous amount of lessons in just a very, very short period of time. There are lots of issues with cloud computing. I am not up here, I'm not selling cloud computing. There are just a short list of things that you have to deal with. They are complicated, and they're really worthy of a methodology and assessment process that determines for you that a cloud provider can actually address privacy, security, disaster recovery, reconstitution types of issues. But again, it's up to you to decide what you require for a level of evidence to make sure that that provider, whether it's yourself, another government agency, or an outside entity, that it's not printed words on a brochure, but it's actual demonstrated capability to do it. Again, we're not in faith-based computing mode here. The issue in cloud is security. So what we've done in the federal government is to recognize that we are spending lots and lots of money on cloud security and regular security. We're doing it at least 100 to 1,000 different ways. It was inconsistent, not uniform, and not a clear understanding of how existing security practices apply to cloud computing. So we created 2 years ago a program called FedRAMP, and we have tried to create a solution for cloud computing that really addresses the cost issues and the inefficiency issues by which we're doing security. It required us to do something that had not been done before. Real quick, what's the baseline set of controls that you want a cloud provider to adhere to? For 18 months, we were in meetings all around the federal government, Intel, DOD, DHS, GSA, Treasury, every agency, the CISO community, the security officers, the financial officers, the legal officers, everybody in the room, and we got agreement on what the standard baseline set of controls should be for cloud computing. Not an insignificant feat. It also does not mean that that is the only thing that's important for an agency to do. That's the baseline. So DHS, DOT, education might have more, they might have less. But we're trying to come up with a uniform set of standards that apply across the board. We created the standard. We created an authorization board to oversee the maintenance of those standards. Then we created an independent assessment process. One of the problems that we have is that even when people test security controls, it's done inconsistently, non-uniformly, deals are cut, eyes are closed. This is important to me, but what's important to the guy across the street? We've got to wake up and realize if we're going to protect data, no matter where it resides, there's a common set of tests that it ought to go through. So we create an independent third-party assessment organizations that we validate at GSA, who are the auditors that go in with the flashlights that require evidence for the standards that we are requiring. Is it popular? You better believe it's not. Because it means that it's transparency into the operations of a provider, and they are not comfortable with that, believe me. But again, we have set the record very straight. If you want to do business with the government, federal government, this is what you must do. And we're willing to go with other providers if you're not going to play ball. You can ask some of the people that are in the room from the companies here about this process. We didn't lower the bar, we raised the bar. Because we're talking about protecting the assets of the federal government. So if anything, we want a really solid thing. And then we asked the DOD, DHS, and GSA for some things that are going to be used government-wide to review and actually jointly authorize those solutions. So it's almost like a good seal of approval, housekeeping seal of approval. 3 gorillas, big guys in government, which deal with very sensitive information. If those 3 gorillas believe that this process was done well and that the security testing was legitimate and all questions have been answered, they will bless it. And what we're trying to do here is create trust in a process rather than each individual in this room saying, I don't trust my neighbor to do a good job. I must do everything myself. I have to repeat every test. I have to document every standard. I have to ask for the evidence I want. We're trying to eliminate that. And at the same time, we realize the world is changing into continuous monitoring. So we are building a set of continuous monitoring, real-time data reporting from providers to the government on the operational security status of their data centers. And again, we're not there yet. We almost have the standards created for that. And that will change the ball game with less requirements on day-to-day paperwork and more about dashboards that we've all agreed to that create for us a view of security that's operational rather than paper-based. Here's some information for you. We have about 80 plus vendors in our queue now to get this authorization. We've created 15 third-party assessment organizations. We've created a new line of business, actually. And by the way, these cannot be cloud service providers. If you're a third-party independent assessment organization, you completely are divorced from engaging in the IT business that you're certifying. ISO standards used for that, very strict process to become one. So it's all being done. We think we've learned some really incredible lessons. This has not been an easy road. I think a lot of questions that we may cover in some of the sessions this afternoon will go into depth onto the how-tos and the lessons learned. They are critical that you understand this is a crawl, walk, run. And you cannot do this if you're risk averse. Security is about risk management. That's what it is. And you have to feel comfortable in the skin of risk management when you go into a security-based approach that's different from all on or all off, which is simply what we've been doing for a very long period of time. So this is our, we also have just introduced this process to the government. We do not believe in creating something and just throwing it into the agencies and say you must follow it. We actually have this in a beta prototype type of environment. We have running several cloud service providers through this. We're learning a lot. And beginning second quarter of fiscal year 13, this will become fully operational. And we will have a whole set of lessons learned that we will print and publish and share with the world on what we've done to actually see whether these standards work, what additional standards are needed, and how continuous monitoring plays a role. So very, very fun environment, and I hope it gives you a flavor of kind of where we are. Bajinder's going to go a little bit into depth on some of the examples so that you get a better sense of what's actually been accomplished.
Very good.
Bajinder?
Okay. Yeah. Very good, Evan. Okay. So from a practical, pragmatic standpoint, from an implementation standpoint, there's a tremendous amount of transformation that's going on in the federal government in information technology. And clearly, as David painted the picture about the challenges and the opportunity for cloud computing and the security, in the federal government, the transformation is really focused, leveraging innovation, agility, efficiency, and the whole concept of shared services to reduce the total cost of ownership, to improve the performance of information systems, to deliver the mission capabilities. So really, it's about cost and improving services, right? And it is a business proposition at the end of the day. It's not technology for the sake of technology. So in the federal government, we clearly have a very strong business driver for driving this transformation. And just to share with you some of the metrics, the budget for IT in the federal government is approximately $80 billion. That's with B with a boy. I mean, that's like the biggest, largest IT budget for any global organization, public or private or otherwise. So clearly, that's a huge concern for the federal government. If you look at some of the other metrics, for example, in the data centers, the proliferation of the data centers over the last number of years. For example, in 1998, I believe the rough count was 430 data centers. In 2010, more than 2,000 data centers across the federal government. Tremendous amount of duplication and redundancy, right? And if you even go beyond those metrics, and you look at the sort of the average server utilization, the best case, conservative estimate is I think it was 10 to 20% server utilization. That's the best case, right? I'm willing to bet you a cup of Starbucks coffee that's probably a lot lower than that. So you talk about, unutilized, inefficient use of resources, right? So clearly, that dictates that there's got to be a fundamental shift in how technology is managed. We've got to be able to shift that paradigm from the old way of doing things, hugging the server, to really something that's on demand, right? Provisioning capacity, performance on demand, having the right level of scalability so that as the mission requirements change, we can provision, we can leverage capacity and the infrastructure. So obviously, I mean, based on Dave described the cloud computing model, cloud has obviously a key role in that equation. It is not the panacea, it is not the silver bullet, but clearly in the overall strategy of consolidating, reducing cost, improving performance, cloud does have a space. As we'll see soon, cloud is extremely flexible model. Now, looking at sort of the strategy in terms of the long term for consolidation of the $80 billion which the federal government spends today in IT, it's projected that cloud will represent conservatively about $20 billion of investments. That's across infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. And as David described, I mean, this really cuts across the enterprise. You know, application, test, dev environment, infrastructure, so forth. So it's a very significant a component of our consolidation and modernization, right? So, so if you step back a little bit, looking at sort of the strategy, what was the point of departure in the federal government? Clearly, a policy played a critical role. The former CIO, the federal CIO, Vivek Kundra, in 2010, issued a 25-point IT reform plan. And the focus on that, the policy was that cloud had to be considered as part of the CIO's modernization strategy. That there was no mandate per se, but clearly in the overall portfolio, whether it's application modernization, infrastructure modernization, that there had to be some contemplation looking at alternative analysis for considering cloud and demonstrating savings, performing alternative analysis. So that became sort of the genesis, if you will, the point of departure from a policy perspective. The cloud-first strategy, it really provided for the first time a framework to the federal government, to the CIOs, in how to evaluate leveraging cloud computing across the enterprise. So these two policy components, these policy documents, were sort of the beginning, the genesis, if you will, of the transformation that I mentioned earlier, right? And if you sort of step back and look at the flexibility that potentially cloud provides, it's not the silver bullet, right? Clearly, I mean, you know, Dave talked about the risks, potential risk mitigation strategy and so forth, but clearly, you know, from a CIO's perspective, the service model and the solution category, it really cuts across the enterprise. Infrastructure, software, platform, even down to the sort of low-level details, messaging in the cloud, CRM. So the portfolio is really across the enterprise. And from a practical strategy perspective, right? If an agency, if a department is truly sort of risk averse and sort of wants to get the feet wet, if you will, in cloud computing, there are lots of options, right? I mean, clearly, in a non-production environment, cloud computing can be introduced as a sort of a risk mitigation strategy. And then slowly, as the organization matures, the cloud can be introduced in the production environment. But clearly, beyond that, too, even disaster recovery, continuity of operation, and so forth. So there are many, many opportunities, many areas where segmentation, where cloud computing can be implemented and risk can be mitigated. So that's sort of the journey, if you will, that we in the federal government are beginning to take. And surely I share with you some of the examples. Here's another sort of depiction, if you will. Incredible rich opportunities in terms of the application of cloud computing, the deployment models, as far as the whole notion, the discussion with public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, community cloud, and obviously the service model, right? So when you mix the three, right, the permutations and the commutations, I'm willing to bet you a cup of Starbucks coffee we can probably define a solution, and I'll give you some specific examples. So it's those kinds of attributes of cloud computing that really give a lot of optimism, if you will. Part of the 25-point implementation plan and the cloud-first strategy was really enable the agency CIOs contract vehicles so where they can leverage cloud service providers. So part of the mechanism in the federal government was really to establish what we call the BPAs, blanket purchase agreements. And we established one for infrastructure as a service. And there were 12 service providers as part of the BPA. So this enables the agencies to be able to develop their modernization strategies and then leverage the acquisition components, the strategies, the blanket purchase agreements, to be able to launch and initiate the cloud service providers to operationalize or implement their cloud strategies, right? Okay, so great. All of that wonderful news. So let's take a look at some of the results, right? We've been at this for the last 3 years or so. Lots of lessons learned. I mean, the back is just bloody here, you know? but it's good stuff. I mean, that's how we learn. But I mean, when we look at from a cost perspective, from an agility perspective, from a benefits to the business, I mean, some of the examples just like awesome, incredibly awesome. Within GSA, David mentioned that GSA migrated the email infrastructure. Legacy was Lotus to the cloud, Google, right? I believe we migrated roughly about 17,000 user accounts. And going through that transition and looking at the cost profile, if you will, our projections are that agency will roughly save $15 million over 5-year projection. That's a pretty significant proposition, right? Beyond the cost profile, similarly, the main USA portal that GSA manages, called usa.gov, was migrated to the cloud. Now, through that migration, we realized roughly a $1.7 million annual savings. But beyond that, so this is like really, it gets me excited. From a business agility standpoint, we looked at the metrics before. Average time it takes to introduce new enhancements to the production. In the legacy environment, it was 9 months. But provisioning through the cloud, it went down to 1 day. So think that from a business perspective. As we deal with the financial crisis and terrorism and things like that, requirements change. The key in IT has to be that we have to respond fast in an agile manner to those emerging business requirements. So that's an example of that, right? Security and Exchange Commission, another wonderful example. Beyond the cost, they migrated their investor inquiry system to the cloud. 90,000 inquiries on an annual basis, right? Average time to respond in the legacy environment, roughly 30 days for the consumers, for the investors. After they migrated their system to the cloud, 7 days. Now imagine, you're in the midst of financial disruption. People are losing their homes. They're losing their investments and all that. And they need to be able to call SEC. The last thing you want to do is make them wait 30 days. So, so here's an example where there's a direct relationship between technology and alignment to the business needs. Rapid response, agility. So, it's a combination of cost and that business response, which is really awesome. Now, from a CIO's perspective, clearly being at the forefront, as I mentioned before, it's not a silver bullet, right? Just like any other strategy, it's got to be thought through, right? First and foremost, I'll speak from my personal experience. You don't want to use cloud for the sake of using cloud. You don't want to be implementing technology for the sake of technology. There has to be a sort of business outcomes that an organization, an agency is trying to achieve. So they need to be clearly articulated. Number two, cloud is a different paradigm shift, right? It's going from hugging the servers to managing services. As Dave clearly articulated, it's service level agreements between the service provider and the receiver. So there's an organizational impact. There's a change management impact, if you will, right? So that needs to be managed. So that has to be assessed. Clearly, security in the cloud. Obviously, there is that tremendous concern. How do we manage data? Who owns the data and so forth? So that has to be thought through. So these are some of the components that have to be thought through in the overall modernization strategy. And then where and how the cloud implementation and injection into the overall enterprise is going to be introduced. That's critical. So these are all the pragmatic components that a CIO must consider. Now, obviously, the FedRAMP is making a significant impact. For the first time in my uneloquent way of saying it, security is actually becoming a business enabler. The fact that through FedRAMP, eventually, the CIOs and the agencies will be able to pick and choose the certified CSPs that have the authorization to operate. That's huge. As a former CIO, my God, it would take 6 months on the average to provision ATOs, and not to mention the resources and the people associated with it. Well, guess what? Now, with the weight, the governance weight of GSA, Homeland Security, DoD, and NIST setting the controls, I have a level of confidence that indeed I can immediately begin to provision my infrastructure or my application modernization. So that's pretty cool stuff, right? So obviously, this needs to be thought through. Same message, right? It's an impact to the organization. You've got to be able to look at the maturity of the organization. You've got to be able to look at the CIOs need to be able to assess the skill set gap. Security provision. Sourcing strategy is a huge thing, right? Clearly from a federal government perspective, the former federal CIO paid attention to that, that it wasn't just the technology. We needed to be able to enable the agencies and CIOs and access to a contract vehicle, acquisition vehicle. So all of these components. And so the picture I'm really trying to paint is that while cloud has promises, it's not a silver bullet. It needs to be thought through, right? So the risk needs to be managed. Some of the lessons learned. I mean, I think Dave really went through quite a bit. Security, obviously. It's extremely important to really understand the control regime that needs to be implemented based on your mission, right? Clearly, FedRAMP has come a long ways in sort of simplifying that equation. Out of the gate, low and moderate level ATOs are being provisioned, and the CIOs in the agencies, in the federal government, can directly leverage that, or if there are unique requirements, they can revisit the ATO and tailor that or customize that. But at least the security piece is becoming a business enabler, right? Oftentimes, from a very pragmatic standpoint, the CIOs will engage the cloud computing model, on the infrastructure side. Keep in mind some of the challenges that obviously we have, whether federal government or state, is the legacy applications. So legacy applications need to be re-architected to be able to leverage the new computing model. So obviously that's a key component. And then the traditional lessons learned, backups, replications, and all of those things. And again, it goes back to the mission needs, right? It's as Dave described in the model. I mean, there's a wide spectrum of the implementation model. Total private, total control, and there's a value proposition. Other end of the spectrum, total public. Maybe not that much control, but there's a value proposition associated with that. So the agency's got to make those kinds of decisions, right? So a lot to be done. Finally, as part of the ongoing effort in helping the agencies, the CIO Council and the Chief Acquisition Office, there's a council of that as well, they actually collaborated and developed a white paper, for lack of a better word, that provides the guidance to the agencies on sort of the checklist for procurement, for the implementation of cloud computing, and it's a guidance document. And I believe this will be available on the CIO.gov website. So we are trying to get the CIO Council and the federal government, the procurement community together to engage, provide a technology perspective from an acquisition perspective, and provide these guidances, if you will, to the agency. So this is an ongoing, a living document, if you will. Dave mentioned earlier www.apps.gov. That's an excellent resource. CIO.gov, an excellent resource. And on the security, FedRAMP.gov, an excellent resource that I encourage all of you to really take a look at that. So and that's really the the detail of the checklist in that white paper. Very pragmatic guide, actually, if you will. And I think, Dave, you went through this thing on the mitigation strategies, security, know the control regime, have identify really the non-negotiable security controls. And you can do that, right, in the cloud implementation. Know your service levels. The key in cloud implementation is that you are migrating from an asset-based management business model to a service-driven. So having strong, measurable, service level agreements and having the right incentives and disincentives for the CSP works wonders. I mean, it's just at the end of the day, the bottom line on the performance it can really have a huge impact. And then really change management. It's a huge change management impact in the government because you're talking about, it's not just a technology modernization strategy, how do you take existing skill sets in the human workforce, right, and you transition that over time. So there's got to be like touch points, right, in the migration strategies to change management to human capital. So those are the kinds of mitigation strategies that we need to be thinking about, right? So I think this is it. I think that's it.
So can we get a warm round of applause for our Washingtonians that came all the way in for this talk.
All right, Dave.
Without anything further, you all are excused to go to your next session. Thank you very much.